naturally do.
Thank you. All right, good morning. I am honored to get to share with you a little bit this morning. I'm going to do just a really quick introduction. We've got a little bit of feedback there. It looks like he's working on that. My name is Kristin Kipp. I was named the National Online Teacher of the Year for 2011 by INACOL and SRAB, which was just an amazing experience to get to travel the country and talk to people about online learning, what it's all about, what are the challenges, what are the successes, tell a few stories. I think I have the coolest job on the planet, to be honest. I get to work with some amazing kids, and I get to see them graduate, whereas without our program they wouldn't. And so that's incredibly exciting, rewarding, but it can be challenging as well. Our plan for this morning is going to be that I'm going to talk a little bit about online learning and some of my favorite projects, some student stories about kind of what works, what doesn't. And then we're going to narrow our focus a little bit down into blended learning and start thinking about what are some of the variables there and what could blended learning look like. I'll give you a heads up. I have taught in all three formats. I've taught face-to-face, I've taught fully online, and I've taught in a blended model. So I can give you a little bit of insight into all of those various situations. I teach for a school called Jeffco's Virtual Academy. Jefferson County is the largest school district in Colorado. And so our online program takes both full-time and part-time online students. So we have kids who could be full-time with us, and then we also have kids that could be in a regular brick-and-mortar high school for part of the day, and then online with us for part of the day. So it's this really interesting mix of students. I work with a lot of teen moms. I work with a lot of athletes. We have even more athletes in the spring because we have a lot of skiers who come online with us and then ski during the day and do school at night for us online. And I work with low-level kids who are coming in with a lot of skill gaps. They're trying to avoid dropping out of high school. And I work with a lot of high-level kids that they didn't like the social stuff that happened at high school. And so they came to us to avoid some of that and really just focus on academics. So we sort of run the gamut. People are always interested in the details of how that works. I actually do work from home. Never thought as a teacher I would ever have that opportunity, but I do work from home. I go into the office a couple days a month. And we do have some face-to-face opportunities for our kids too, but they're optional because we take kids from across the state of Colorado. And so I can't require a student from Grand Junction to come down to Denver to meet with me, other than for state testing, of course. And we have those sorts of opportunities as well. I have a blog at educationfrontier.org that you're welcome to check out. And I also have a book coming out in June with Josie Bass, which I'm super excited about. It's called Teaching on the Education Frontier, Instructional Strategies for Blended and Online Learning. And I tried to get very real about what are the nuts and bolts of making this work in a blended classroom, making it work in an online classroom. I actually had a video there, but unfortunately we don't have sound to my computer. But if you want to look it up, if you search on YouTube, Day in the Life, Online Teacher Colorado, it'll come up with the folks at Pearson came around and followed me around for a couple of days and created this video of what online teaching is all about. But they also talked to some of my kids, which I think is the really powerful part of kids talking about what works for online learning, what's worked for them. So if you want to check that out, you're welcome to. If you search Day in the Life and Online Teacher Colorado on YouTube, it will come up. My apologies that we weren't able to get that running this morning. All right, so I always like to, first of all, we have kind of a small group today, which I think is great. If you guys have questions as we go through, I'm happy to do informal and kind of elaborate on some things, but I'll also have time to take questions at the end, too. First, I think it's always important, and let me get a feel for the room, first of all. How many people in here who are teachers, currently teaching? Excellent. And administrators? Excellent. And some other category that doesn't fit? A few. Okay, perfect. I love having a room of teachers. It means I can get into some of the nitty-gritty, and I'm happy to do that. I think it's always important to start by grounding myself in the students that I serve. Mark Prensky gave us the really fascinating concept of digital natives and digital immigrants. Are you guys familiar with this? Yes. Okay. Gave us a really fascinating concept of digital natives, which for those who aren't familiar, the quick version of it Digital natives are kids who've grown up around technology. It is intuitive to them. It's the way that they interact with the world. Whereas digital immigrants, we can learn to speak the language, but it's always going to be a second language. Okay, so we have this really fascinating thing going on in classrooms right now where we have quite a few digital immigrants teaching digital natives. And we have to start thinking about how do we translate the things that we do into that digital space so that we're speaking their language, so that we're speaking the language of the digital natives of our students, which is why I think this work is so important, thinking about how do we bring digital learning into the space where we live every day so that we can connect with those kids, so that we can motivate them. A couple of facts about digital natives. First of all, I'll let you take a look at that for just one moment. This is monthly voice and text usage by age. Really fascinating statistics about how often kids are text messaging and interacting in that space. You know, when I first moved into teaching online, I used email quite a bit to interact with my students. And then I realized that wasn't particularly working so well for me. And because, actually, I'm going to show you the statistic in a minute, only about 11% of kids check email on a daily basis. So I had to learn to text. And I text all the time with my students because it's the way that they're comfortable interacting with me. It's amazing the kinds of stories that kids will tell me about what's going on with their learning in a text message. And by the way, that is kids sometimes that I also work with face-to-face. When they text with me, they tend to be a little more open about what's going on than they do in a regular classroom. Really fascinating. So many people around them, or that face-to-face interaction, maybe they can't give me the whole story, but if we're texting, I get the bigger picture for them. This is actually a bit of an old statistic from 2009, the amount of time that children and teens spend on the computer. An hour and a half as of 2009. I would guess that it's significantly more by now. This is just the kids are interacting with technology in a ubiquitous way, constantly. What this is the different communication methods that kids are using on a daily basis. You can obviously see text messaging is the only one going up. Everything else is pretty stagnant, except for email, which is actually going down a little bit. As I mentioned before, when I first moved into online teaching, or even when I taught face-to-face, I thought I was pretty tech-savvy emailing my students, right? And then I realized only 11% of them were even going to get the email because they weren't going to be checking it, and I needed to find some new ways to interact with kids. I had a student a couple semesters ago that I always ask for their email. The very first thing in a student survey, I say, hey, give me your emails and so that I can communicate with you. And she said, well, Ms. Kipp, I'm going to give you my email, but I don't really check it. And in fact, I don't really like computers all that much, and I avoid them like the plague. My knee-jerk reaction was, you're in an online classroom. There's no way you're going to make it. You don't even like computers. But I knew that I had to find a way to interact with this student. Did some research. Figured out that there's a way to format text messaging phone numbers so it looks like an email address. Thus, every time I emailed my entire class, she got a text message. Really helped her stay connected to my class. Like I said, my knee-jerk was, oh, you're never going to make it. This isn't going to work. But by finding some workarounds to reach this digital native, she was able to be really successful in my class. Again, that's why I feel like this work is so important, finding ways to reach kids. Now, in a conference like this, I'm probably preaching to the choir about reaching digital natives and the importance of this. What I'm going to talk about next is a course philosophy. This is for online classrooms, but it's also for any classroom, blended face-to-face. For a course to be a really good course, I want three things going on. I want kids connected to content, which we get, of course. We want them to learn science and math and English and history. But I also want them connected to each other, and I want them connected to me as the caring adult in their life. And I've got to think about creative ways to do all three of those things, whether it's in a digital space, whether it's face-to-face, to give them that really high-quality learning experience. So first, connection to content. I think we all get that. There's a lot of really great digital content out there. A few things that I think about when I evaluate digital content. First, the non-Googleable assignment. I want assignments that are not easily Googled. Because I want kids thinking critically. So what does that look like? An example would be if I were to have students read The Great Gatsby, which they still do in my online classroom, by the way. We still expose them to the classics. And then I ask them to write about the significance of color in The Great Gatsby. If you were to Google that, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of hits that talk about the significance of color in The Great Gatsby. It's a Googleable assignment. So instead, if I really want kids to think about theme within the novel, what if I had them create a fictional conversation where they have Gatsby talk to, say, Juliet from Romeo and Juliet? If they were to have a dinner party, what would they talk about? What would they have in common? What would they disagree about? It gets to the idea of the theme of love and how love develops and how we hold on to it, but in a completely different way. Not only that, but I can swap it up every time I teach it, because if you leave an assignment the same for too long, it becomes Googleable because kids are smart, and I don't blame them. So I could swap that up. You know, instead of Juliet, instead we're going to have a conversation between Gatsby and Eliza from the Chrysanthemums, or whatever. You get the idea. I look at digital content and make sure that it's not easily Googled, because I want kids going to that higher level. Assignments that require critical thinking, and every unit includes student choice. I do a lot of literature circles. I also, by the way, teach a history course. It's really, really kind of a funny story. We have a state legislator who's also a teacher for us, and in the spring, he goes off to the state legislature. So I took over one of his classes this semester. I'm also certified in history, which has been a really fun experience to teach in a different content area than I usually do. My history kids, for student choice, I had them pulling really interesting Civil War images from whatever area they might be interested in. So some of them are pulling Civil War images from the home life. Some are pulling ones about what slavery was really like. Some are pulling ones from battlefields. Some are pulling ones from artillery. And we're pulling them together into a wiki. So kids still have choice about the way that they're tackling their learning, but we're all learning similar content. When we pull it all together, we're getting a complete standard, if that makes sense. So I try to include that in every single unit. Now, the other thing that I want kids, and this is where I think sometimes we forget. We know about connecting to content. I also want kids connected to each other. This came from a really interesting conversation with my dad. When I moved into online learning, he wasn't so sure that he liked it. In fact, he was very much opposed to online learning, because he said, "Kristin, what about those kids, all those conversations that happen before and after class and in the hallway? Isn't that learning just as valuable as what happens inside the classroom? And you're not going to have that in an online classroom." And I thought, you're right. You're absolutely right. There's a lot of conversations that happen informally, and how am I going to bring that into my classroom? I really want kids, when they come into my online classroom, to feel like they're a part of a bigger community. I want them to know each other's stories. I want them to know each other's challenges, and I want them working together to challenge each other's thinking. So I incorporate a lot of discussions. I have live sessions where we come together into a webinar. We do group projects. I'm going to talk about some examples of that. Group projects online, which, by the way, can completely be adapted into blended learning assignments. They work great. I'm actually, in my workshop this afternoon, going to really go into some depth about what a blended assignment looks like. But we'll talk about some group projects. Peer review. It's really fun. Every year I have, when we finish Hamlet, I have a movie night where kids can come face to face and we'll watch Hamlet together and talk about it. And when the kids come in, they look like strangers to each other, but then they start saying names, and they've been working together all semester, and they're like, "Oh, you're Caden. I know you. We worked on that thing together. You remember?" And within 5 minutes, we have the same sort of classroom rapport that we had in a face-to-face classroom. Really amazing how that works. So I want kids connected to each other in order to deepen their learning, and I want them connected to me as their teacher. I work with quite a few at-risk kids, and sometimes they don't have a caring adult in their life. Every year when I go to graduation, it's this really amazing experience. I face-to-face graduation with kids who I've worked with online all semester. They'll look at me, and I look like a stranger, and I'll say, "Hey, I'm Ms. Kipp," and they'll say, "Oh, Ms. Kipp, I'm Caden. I've been working with you all semester. You're the first teacher that ever really cared about me." It's incredible. This kid looks like a stranger, and yet all of a sudden I get hugs and tears at graduation because I've connected to them as their teacher. That means I fulfill a lot of roles. I am their life coach. I am a mentor, a counselor, all these sorts of things I jump into depending on whatever they need from me. I have very high expectations. I give them very in-depth feedback on their assignments. And then I do a lot of relationship building along with that. So as we think about blended learning, we have to think about how these three things are happening both in a blended space, in a face-to-face space, and in a digital space, and what works best where. I think in an ideal world, we have all three of these things going on in both spaces. When we're face-to-face, kids are connecting to content, they're connecting to each other, they're connecting to me as a teacher, but also when we're online. And as I mentioned before, sometimes it happens in a way you wouldn't expect. Connecting to the teacher might happen more digitally than it does face-to-face because kids are able to be more open with me, perhaps, on the phone or text messaging or whatever. All right, so let's talk some examples. Get specific about what this might look like. Some collaborative projects that I've had kids working with. One is a wiki. My students use wikis quite a bit to collaborate with each other, have group projects. A couple of examples of what that looks like. No, that's fine. One is as a novel wrap-up. So I build a wiki that is a blank shell, if you will, with pages for the content that I want. So for example, when we finish Hamlet, I create a wiki that has a page for themes and symbols and conflicts, and I tell kids, I want you to create Spark Notes for me. I give them the blank shell, and then as students, they go in and collaborate together to create a Spark Notes style website. They've reviewed all the content, but they've done it together in this collaborative space. It's really, really fun. It's engaging for kids, and it gets to my ultimate goal, which is that they've reviewed the core concepts. I have also done an editor's toolbox using a wiki. So same idea, except I build a wiki that has, I want a page for commas, I want a page for run-ons, I want a page for fragments, I want a page with videos, I want a page with grammar games. I build the pages inside of the wiki, and then I open it up to my students. In fact, I've done this multi-grade level, so my sophomores and my seniors work together on the project, adding in resources so that by the end we have something that we have collaborated on together. It's really amazing to see seniors challenged by my sophomores who are working harder in it than they are. And it creates this really interesting project at the end. We've also done research projects. In fact, my English 12 students are doing this right now. So they are researching one of the Time 100 most influential people of the 20th century. And they, within a wiki, each student creates their own page where they're keeping track of their research questions, all the sources they've used, all their notes, etc. And then midway through the project, they start helping each other. So you're no longer just creating your page on the wiki with all of your information. You're also researching somebody else's topic and finding some resources for them. So my student who's researching Gandhi is going to help the student who's researching Marilyn Monroe, which, by the way, they are both on the list. Isn't that interesting? Coming up with sources together. So they've not just researched one topic, but they've actually helped each other. And then they go back to their original wiki pages and use those as their research project. Really fascinating way for kids to challenge each other's thinking. Works in an online space, works in a blended space as well. Groups. My students work in literature circles quite a bit. So in a sci-fi unit, they get to choose from 1984, Brave New World, Fahrenheit 451. The students self-select into small groups. They read those projects together. They read those books together. We've done literature circles for a long time in face-to-face classrooms. What's different is that we use a discussion space that develops over the course of 6 weeks instead of 45 minutes. So students are initially posting responses to the things that they've read and talked about, and then over the course of 6 weeks, they're going back to those discussions online and deepening those ideas. It's a very, very different experience because the discussion isn't limited by time, right? It can continue over multiple weeks and ideas. My science teachers that I work with also have lab partners, so kids are doing labs with household items at home and then coming together into a discussion area to think about their findings, to challenge each other's ideas, to write their summaries together, etc. Again, a really fun way for kids to challenge each other's thinking and get that informal learning happening as well. Finals, I have had kids do a webfolio, so they pull their best work from the entire school year. And actually, I've gone even further than that. Sometimes I'll give them the standards for my class and say, find me the assignments that show me how you have progressed on each one of those standards. And then I want you to build me a website and show me your progress. Reflect on that. Really fascinating. Kids are building websites, number one, which is just fun and something that a lot of them may need in the future, the ability to do that. But then they're also thinking critically about their learning, going through and finding those assignments that have shown their progress. What's really, really interesting is when a student says, Ms. Kipp, I didn't actually grow in this standard, and here's why. Then, as a teacher, I can either go, okay, well, that was that one student situation, or if I start to see it over multiple students, I know I have a problem that I need to adjust to. It's been a really fascinating learning experience for me as well as my kids. So then the question all of you may be asking is, does it really work? Does including these digital elements in a classroom actually work? Actually make the class more engaging? Or what if it's just more work for me? Does it really work? This student is one of my students from my very first year teaching online. I share her story with permission. Her name is Jillian. She was in a brick and mortar high school her freshman year and had kidney stones, so missed about 60 days of school her freshman year of high school. Then, at the beginning of her sophomore year, her dad passed away from esophageal cancer. And she went back to school, and kids thought she was faking her illnesses, and they didn't get her anymore because she'd gone through all of this stuff. She had essentially dropped out her spring semester. She doesn't call it that. Her mom says she had dropped out. She says she was taking a break. She just wasn't sure what she needed to do. Thankfully, her mom stayed on her. We opened our online high school her junior year, and she came to us. After about 6 weeks in my class, she said, Ms. Kipp, this class is too easy. And I was like, wow, this class is too easy. Turned out this is an Ivy League quality kid, that what we were doing in a regular classroom just wasn't working for her. And even when she moved online, it wasn't completely working for her. And I went, I've got to get creative. And thankfully in the online space, I was able to do that. She moved into an independent study with me. Nobody knew she was doing anything different than anybody else. But she moved into an independent study. She did some really fascinating projects. One of them was where she compared vampires in Dracula with vampires in Twilight, compare-contrast paper. And then she wrote a short story in which she incorporated elements of both into the same paper. This is an amazing kid. Actually graduated as the valedictorian of her senior class 2 years later. Had we not had the opportunity to use these digital tools with her, we would have failed her. And I can't even imagine. This was an Ivy League kid that would have dropped out, that would have been done if we hadn't had the opportunity for her to have some flexibility in her learning. And it's why this work is so important, because there are students like Jillian in Ohio, there are students like Jillian across the country, and we need to make sure that we're meeting their needs. Whether that's in a blended learning model, whether that's a fully online model, whether it's a face-to-face classroom where we have some more digital tools that we incorporate for that flexibility, for that deeper learning. If we'd gotten to watch the video, which I hate that we weren't able to, you would have seen Jillian talking about her classroom experience. She says, and I love this, she said, it wasn't the public school experience, it was your learning. She's like, I owned it, it was mine, and that was why she was so successful with us. So a couple of things, there are lots of teachers in the room, and so what you may be thinking is, well, what does this look like as far as skills go? What does this transition into being more of teaching in a digital space, teaching in a blended classroom look like? Well, I was really surprised when I moved into online teaching how many of my skills transferred. Just like a traditional teacher, I have parent-teacher conferences, I deal with parent phone calls. My grading looks very similar, although my feedback is probably more in-depth than I used to be able to give. My professional development, student intervention, staff meetings, I still have staff meetings. They're just on a webinar instead of face-to-face. All those sort of things happen. But there's this whole other set of non-traditional skills that I had to start thinking about too in that digital space. Building course content, for example. How do I do that in an online space? Just facilitating discussion boards. How much is too much to be involved in a discussion board? When do I have to pull back? How do I make sure I'm still visible in my classroom without me taking over? Those are sorts of things I had to think about. Digital tools, my email load went crazy. My text messaging load, in fact, I was just text messaging with a student last night. I get text messages all the time from kiddos, and it's part of my job. It's a different kind of workload. I've had to really think about how do I protect myself and still have my personal life in addition to my professional life. But it's also incredibly rewarding for that to happen as well. Oh, and other thing I wanted to mention on there is student phone calls. We've really been working as a staff on student phone calls, which sounds funny, right? We all know how to talk on the phone with kids. But having a phone conversation one-on-one with a student is a little different than having a conversation with them face-to-face, so we've had to brainstorm things along those lines. But also doing some life coaching on that phone call. What does that look like? How do I talk to a kid about what's actually going on and not be judgmental about them? Set some small goals. Let's set a 24-hour goal instead of me going, okay, well, here's what you're going to do. You're going to graduate high school in 2 years, and you're going to make sure that you do this, 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 and this. It's a very different experience if I'm talking to a kid every week. How do I become the coach in their life? So continuum of blended learning options, and a lot of this depends on your model, but sometimes there's even flexibility within the model that you teach in to incorporate some of these ideas. So on the left, we have fully face-to-face instruction. And I still put this on the continuum of blended learning options because you can have face-to-face instruction that's significantly enriched by those digital tools. So and again, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the workshop this afternoon. So we have a face-to-face classroom, but there's this digital component to it where kids are working at home or even working within my classroom in our online space and completing some course content there. Still a blended learning option. I don't have to fight anybody about face-to-face time. I'm just incorporating some blended elements. Now, some of you may be thinking in the back of your head, what about those kids who don't have internet access at home? I think that's a great question. Couple things. One, I had this really interesting conversation with a teacher in Boston who is doing blended learning. As a part of the book that I wrote, I had the opportunity to interview a lot of teachers who are teaching online and doing blended learning. And I asked her this exact question because she works with this really at-risk population of kids, yet she has at least 20% of her class their grade is in an online space. So what do you do about that? How do you manage that? And she said, you know what? At the beginning of the year, I took a poll and I said, okay, I need to know right now if you have absolutely no access to a computer or a phone with internet. Her entire group of students, she had 2 who didn't have access somewhere, a library, a friend's house, on a phone, whatever it was. And then she made sure that her content was accessible through that, whatever devices the kids had. For those 2 kids, she opened up her computer in the morning and in the afternoon. She said it was really funny, actually. After she got to know those 2 kids, she realized those were kids that struggled to do anything above and beyond, and so it was definitely difficult for them to access that online course content, but it was difficult for them to access the face-to-face content too. So this is one option to think about. Another is where some seat time is replaced by online instruction. We call that hybrid. The current word is blended, where maybe you meet Monday through Wednesday face-to-face, you meet sometimes online. Again, depends on your model and what's possible. And then, of course, lives fully in a digital space. Continuum of things for administrators to think about, for us to think about as teachers. Now, this is where the rubber meets the road for blended learning. I think we tend to get stuck on that concept of replacing FaceTime, right? We tend to go, well, I can't replace any FaceTime, so I can't do blended learning in my classroom, which is just not true. Because on that continuum, there's a spot where we can teach fully face-to-face and have some blended options. Think about this as a mixer, like a sound mixer, and these are your different adjusters or knobs on there. We can think about seat time being one of our variables. But then there's also some others. So on the left is completely face-to-face and the right is completely digital. So teacher communication. Maybe I move some of my communication into a digital space through text messaging with kids, through emailing with kids, through a discussion board, or whatever. Some of those communications could happen digitally instead of face-to-face. Or student collaboration. Maybe I want, I'm not really interested in communicating with kids via text messaging. It's just not who I am. That's okay. What if I want to have a group project? What if I want to incorporate a wiki into my classroom or something along those lines? I could say, I'm going to do a little bit of that and see how that works. Grading. I have a teacher that I used to work with at a high school in Evergreen, Colorado, who's gone completely paperless because he realized how much faster grading is online than it is with a stack of papers. This is one of my huge transitions into online learning too. I went, wow, look, instead of the giant stack of papers, I've got little green exclamation points in my grade book, and I can grade them from right in there. Maybe I want to move into that so that kids are submitting some work online. I'm doing some of my grading online, or I'm keeping my whole grade book online. Class discussion. Maybe, I get really excited about the idea that I could start a discussion face-to-face, and then we could finish it at home over several days in an online discussion board. What are some options for that? Assessment. Maybe I decide, I want kids to have multiple opportunities to take a test. And I want them to have a different test every time they take it, which is possible in a digital space, really, really difficult at home or in a face-to-face environment. So maybe I want to move some of my assessment online, even if they're taking it within my classroom. And I want kids to be able to take a test 2 or 3 times to demonstrate their understanding. But I want that test to change every time they take it. That's possible. Create a question bank, have that test change every time students take a look at it. Or maybe I want to move some of my assignments into that online space. Instead of sending kids home with homework, I want to send them to an online space instead. So as you think about this, some things to consider. One is personal preference. We all have our preferences about what's comfortable for us as teachers. We need to think about, we need to be honest, be true to that, to our teaching philosophy, to what's possible within our system. Like I said, some of you may not be comfortable texting with kids, and that's okay. What are some other small steps that we could take to incorporate digital elements into a regular classroom? And then what are the tools that are available? It varies by district, by school, what you might have access to. I initially started out teaching in Blackboard. Every single teacher in my entire school district had access to Blackboard. Only about 10% of us used it. We have to look at those tools that are available and think about ways that we can incorporate them. We've made the switch to Schoology this year. I'm going to talk about that a little bit in my afternoon session. Schoology is a really powerful tool. It's also free if you want to build a digital space. Schoology is a great option for that. So there's some other great options out there, Edmodo, etc. So there are tools out there for doing that. But your school district may also have some really powerful tools that maybe you don't even know about that could be used as well. Types of digital content you could consider. Discussions. Maybe I even just create a bank of readings that I want kids using when they're at home. It can be as simple as creating a file folder with some of those readings and a spot maybe to collaborate on them. Digital lectures, videos, assignments, collaborative assignments are all things that you could have within that digital space. Now, one thing that I really want to caution you about, you see my few over here. We know that kids don't do that well with sit and get. And I think we have to be very, very careful as educators who are moving into a digital space that we don't try to give them sit and get in an online classroom or in a digital classroom. What that would look like is, okay, sit down, read this, answer these questions, submit the assignment. Sit down, read this, answer the questions, submit the assignment. That's not what good digital learning looks like, just like it's not what good face-to-face learning looks like. So we need to find ways for kids to collaborate. Are videos great in an online classroom? Absolutely. I love the fact that kids can pause and rewind when they need to see content again. It's very different than when you're presenting up front. But I don't want that to be the bulk of their experience. I want them to have the opportunity to, maybe they do some readings, maybe they do a video, but then I want them creating something out of it, whether that's a discussion, a wiki, a podcast, whatever. There's some really great options for kids to actually interact with content. Same as face-to-face, we want to make sure that we're doing that well in a digital space, in a blended learning space, in a face-to-face space as well. So I have talked a lot at you. And what I would love at this point is to take some time and talk about some questions. I can talk nitty-gritty, whatever you your burning questions are about blended learning, digital learning, or online learning. Yeah.
Back to the slide that had the sliders.
Yes, absolutely. There we go. You're welcome. My husband was a music major, and this was his brainchild. I was like, I need to be able to represent it. He's like, well, it's a slide, it's a slider, like a sound slider. Questions I can answer for you.
When is your session this afternoon?
It is at 1 o'clock, 1 to 2:30. Yeah.
It's a technical question.
Sure.
You mentioned formatting your Gmail email as text
Yes.
messages.
Yes.
Can you talk about that?
Sure, absolutely. So it's a really kind of a difficult, people always ask me about it. It's a really difficult concept to explain how it works. So any phone number that receives text messages can be reformatted as a email address. But it depends on the carrier that the person has. So you have to know so AT&T has a different format than Sprint does, for example. So if you know the phone number and the carrier, then you can format it as an email address, put it in with your class list, and the student will receive the first 125 characters of any email that you send to that email. So I've had to get really good at putting the most important information in the very beginning, but it also reminds them to go check their email too, because they forget that email exists. So they get that text message and then they go out and check that. If you search, I'm trying to think what the exact search term would be, something like text message to email, there's a website that has an entire list of every carrier and exactly how to format it. That's a really nice option. We've had this really interesting thing that's happened to us this year with Schoology, is that, so we used to email kids quite a bit, and then we got Schoology, which has a messaging system that's very much like Facebook. It's an awesome option. And what happened is the second we turned on Schoology, kids stopped emailing me. They only message me in Schoology or text message me. I get adult communications in my email. Kid communications wind up coming through Schoology because it looks like Facebook. It's like, oh, cool, I can message her right in here. And then they text message me as well when they want an instant response. Yeah, it's just really fascinating, the dynamics of communication and where we're comfortable. And I learned that I have to be a bit of a chameleon. I have my preferred mode of communication, but that doesn't matter. What matters is what the student's preferred mode of communication is. And if that's a phone call, which there are still kids who prefer to get a phone call, then I need to phone call, give them a call. If they want to text with me, I need to text with them. And that's my job as a teacher, to adapt my communication style for them. Good, yeah? That is a great question, and there are a lot of different philosophies on how to manage that issue. At Jeffco, we do have a lot of autonomy. They have said from the very beginning we trust our teachers and our teachers' ability to adapt for student needs, and so we do have course edit privileges. We start with a base course, and then we have my principal actually said to me the other day, I want you to think about the course as a textbook, and I want you to use it as you see students' needs. In an ideal world, I would have an overbuilt course that has 12 units, and I need to teach 8, and I assign them based on student needs. That's where I want to get someday. But yeah, I do have a lot of autonomy to change the course. And then what we do from there is, at the end of a semester, we incorporate changes that teachers have made into the course master so that we all come back to the same course at the end. I have talked to a lot of teachers who don't have that right, and they say, well, Kristin, this is really cool, but how do I do that if I can't even change my courses? A couple things that we have brainstormed, ways to get around that. One is that every now and then the whole class comes together to do one of these collaborative activities separate from the original course. The other is to create a discussion space where kids can have more general conversations than about a specific content. Others is to create a wiki or a class website that is a supplement to what's in the original course. I love that my district gives me a lot of autonomy because I feel trusted as a professional, and I'm able to change some things for kids' needs. Others? Yeah?
You said you use a lot of group assignments,
Mm-hmm.
collaborative assignments. Is it evident when there's a slacker that's how do you handle that, or how do you design
Sure.
assignments?
It is not what's great about the digital space is it's not really evident to everybody else that kid is a slacker, but it's evident to me. because I'm obviously seeing them being absent in the course. One thing that I try to do is, first of all, design my assignments so that even if there is a group of slackers, that it's not going to bring down the rest of the class. So for example, in the wiki assignment that I was talking about, kids might be required to contribute at least 150 words to 4 different pages. So then if I'm missing a certain person, only 80% of my kids do it, for example, it still looks like a fleshed out assignment, and that 20% doesn't create the glaring gap. When I have kids move into group projects for, say for a reading, usually I have them self-select, which means I get a variety of kids in every group. And it's really interesting, actually, in my sci-fi unit. I've noticed there's one novel in particular that all the slackers tend to choose. I think it's because it's the shortest one, but it's also the hardest one. And so in those groups, then I can work one-on-one with those kids and that particular group. I do a couple different ways. One is to email those kids and say, hey, noticed you're missing. What's going on there? And I frame it as, I'm worried about you. Let's talk about what's going on instead of, you're so bad. But then the other thing that I do is I really praise the groups that are doing really well. They get a virtual high five from me. It's like the shape of a hand that goes on the announcements board for a day or two. That's a virtual high five. It says, place your hand here, for that group. So that I really praise the groups that are doing really well. And then all of a sudden I'll start getting emails from those other kids like, well, why didn't we get a virtual high five? Well, you're not doing anything. When you do something, then I'll give you a virtual high five. So I manage it from the positive and the negative side for those groups. There are some really great tools. Blackboard actually has a great wiki tool to be able to see who's doing what, where. When we moved to Schoology, I started using Google Sites for my wikis, which I can also see the revision history, see who's done what. But I also have kids label their contributions with a first initial and a last name, and then I can keep track of who's doing what that way too. It sounds like a real pain to grade, but it's actually not as bad as it sounds to just check out, pay attention to who's done what. Yeah?
What does your grade book look like? What are the grades that you're actually grading?
Are you talking types of assignments or?
I use Schoology as well.
Sure.
I do a lot of participation grades, especially with the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a lot of what you do in terms of just how active the student is in terms of grading the project?
It depends on the particular assignment. My gradebook is a huge mix of assignments. About 10% of their grade is live sessions, which is attending webinars with me or watching the recording. And then maybe 10% or so is discussions. And I do that around quality and quantity. So I actually grade, I tell them, I want a minimum number of posts, so like 3 or 4 posts. But then I also tell them I will only count posts that contribute significantly to the discussion, and I explain what that means. So, bring in an outside web resource or build on somebody else's ideas or ask a really interesting question. Otherwise, I won't count your posts. So those I agree posts or the posts, I love the posts where they actually are like critiquing each other's posts. And I'm like, well, it's a discussion. You don't say, wow, that was a really great comment, and then you don't say anything else. And so I train kids about what to do with that. And then I would say the other 80% is a mixture of tests and assignments. I use Dropboxes to build assignments, worksheets where they're interacting critically. So it's not just short answer responses, but building graphic organizers, showing me notes, etc. Does that help? Okay. Gives you somewhat of an idea. I love the digital gradebook. I'm such a nerd like that. It's so organized. It's so easy for me to see exactly what I need to grade and how, and that makes my life a lot easier. Yeah?
What do you do about state tests?
State tests, that is a good question. Our full-time students come to us for state testing. So we come together face-to-face. We have it in a few weeks. It's actually kind of funny. We test in our district's main headquarters because we don't have a building. So we test in the main headquarters, and we get special visits from assessment because they happen to be in the building and come test they come look at our testing environment. We do have kids come in for that if they're full-time with us. Part-time kids with us, they take at their brick and mortar high school, they take their state tests there. And along the way I should mention too, our formative assessments are online, and so we have gotten special permission from the district for kids to access the formative assessments from home, and they do those tests from home.
What about the kids that live, say, in a different part of the state?
Yes, right now, thankfully, there are not that many of them outside of our school district, and so we're able to accommodate for those kids. A lot of times they come into Denver for the state tests. Some of the bigger online schools in the state actually do testing sites around the state all at the same time to get all of that testing done. Great question. We're really excited, actually, about the new assessments because we feel like our kids are on a computer so much, interacting with the computer so much, that being tested on a computer is actually going to be a more valid assessment for them. So we're super excited about that. All right, we are a little bit over on time. Thank you so much for starting your conference with me. It's very, very early in the morning. I really, really appreciate it. And look forward to seeing some of you at the 1 o'clock session. Thank you.